And so let's step back and talk about disruption for a minute. I think it's clear to everybody that digital technology is the driving force of disruption today. And while that may be obvious, I think it is worthwhile to consider why that's the case. And there are three things I'd like to point to. The first is just the order of magnitude improvement. So over the course of my lifetime, computing power and performance and cost have improved by like 1 billion-fold, which, if that had happened in our agriculture, we could basically feed the world on a farm the size of Central Park here in New York, right? 1 billion-fold improvement. Or if that had happened in air travel since the Wright brothers, we could have gone from here to Beijing in a few seconds and it would have cost us a few cents. So just imagine that one thing alone, that order of magnitude of improvement, is a big reason why disruption is such a powerful force. Another aspect to this is what I call the general purpose effect. And it's basically this: there's not a human activity that would not be made better through improved ability to share, manipulate, and store information. And this is true of everything from ordering groceries to cryptocurrencies to launching satellites or dating. Basically, anything that involves the laws of math or physics or fuzzy logic will someday be solved better by a machine than a human being. And the final area, as if that weren't enough, is that this is essentially the network effect, right? And I define a network effect simply as this way. If I'm the only one with a phone, it's pretty worthless. If everybody has a phone, it's indispensable. And it used to be that networks were extraordinary barriers to entry. I mean, think of railroad lines, telephones, or even having 1,000 stores. The interesting thing is, with the internet as a network of networks, those barriers are changing, right? So I launched my book in January of this year. I self-published because I was writing about disruption, and it somehow seemed intellectually dishonest to go to a publishing house when I did that. And so I was very happy that Jim Cramer asked me to come on his show. He gets about 200,000 viewers for his show. It's his great way of getting some publicity around my book. At the same time, I launched my book on LinkedIn, and I actually got 100,000 views of my book launch on LinkedIn. And by the way, I'm not a media company, right? So there's a big change. Now, the interesting thing is networks are still important barriers to entry, but the way they're created is different. And what do I mean by that? I have a question for you guys. Have you ever heard of Navtech? Anybody? Okay, I've asked thousands of people this question, and so far no one has heard of it. A company called Nokia, which you would have heard of, spent about $8 billion creating a system which was going to help us all drive places and know the best way to go based on sensors and information about where traffic was moving. Does anybody here use Waze? Okay, so we know who won that. Now, Waze didn't spend $8 billion. They just signed up a bunch of people. They created a two-sided network natural monopoly, but without anything physical. And so things have changed in the way networks have worked. So the end result of all of this is that companies today, S&P 500 companies, have a life expectancy of something like 15 years. And that number used to be more like 50 or 60 years. And what I think is interesting and somewhat paradoxical about that is you would think, with all this information technology, why wouldn't these big companies just be getting more and more efficient? And the reality is that disruption literally disrupts incumbent companies. They become part of the Disruptors Feast. And there's a few reasons why that's the case. And the first one is just simple self-interest. People have been standing in the way of technology way back since the Luddites, right? In a way, it's something that industries do well if there's a change that they don't like. It's like the tobacco companies telling us that smoking isn't bad for us. I know some of you work in renewable energy. It's like the fossil fuel companies telling us climate change isn't a problem. Self-interest can be a powerful motivator to stand in the way of new technologies. In my own industry, in travel and tourism, one of my favorite examples is what was happening in Paris as Uber was coming into that city. The taxi drivers unleashed something they called Operation, and this is like almost a joke, but it's actually real. They called it Operation Escargot. They were slowing traffic down to a snail's pace to protest, and of course, it didn't really work for them. But those kind of self-interested barriers to change aren't the only ones. The harder ones are if you have a profitable business. Let's say you have a very valuable and profitable credit card business and a new payment system comes in, you're going to spend more time protecting your own business as the incumbent than really reacting and using new technologies. And so self-interest can be more complicated than simply Operation Escargot. Another challenge in the way of disruption is something that I call change blindness. And it goes back to what I remember learning from my economics professors way back in college, where they told me, you should think of people and firms as information-seeking, utility-maximizing, rational decision makers. Have you ever met someone like that? Not even Dutch people are like that, right? You're probably wondering, I could speak with a Dutch accent if you wanted, by the way, but the reality is, and this is something behavioral economists came up with long after I left college, and that is, people are not just irrational, they're systemically irrational, right? And this is something that salespeople and magicians and marketers have known all along, right? Otherwise, why would we have $4,000 handbags or smoke cigarettes or run marathons, right? We're an irrational species, right? We tend to overestimate our ability to do almost anything.